Welcome to 2026's mid-year book freakout tag, which also doubles up as a celebration of this channel. So if you guys are maybe newer here, you may not know that 9 years ago in July 2017, I posted the first ever video on this channel, which just so happened to be the mid-year book freakout tag. So every year we revisit this at around the mid-July point to check in and see where we're at halfway through the year after the first 6 months of reading, but also to celebrate my booktube birthday. As always, I just want to take a moment to thank you guys for supporting me on this journey, for continuing to come back year after year and watch and support my content. Even if you are not somebody who has joined us over on Patreon, even if you're not a regular viewer of the channel, if you only dip in and out, I appreciate every single thing that you guys do, no matter how small it may be, to engage with and support this channel. My life would be very, very different without this little corner of the internet, and therefore without you guys who have allowed me to be here on this platform. But the mid-year book freakout tag is a list of, I think, 14 questions that prompt you to look back on the first half of the year and your reading over those first 6 months. The original creator of this tag was Chami way back in the day. I actually don't think the original video exists anymore, but I will link Chami's channel down in my description box, and I will also leave all of the questions there in case you guys would like to go ahead and do this tag for yourself. But jumping right into those questions, the first one starts us off really strong because it is, what is the best book that you've read so far in 2026? Now technically this is my second best book of the year, but you'll see why I'm using it for this question in just a moment. But that one is The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. This was a 2025 release and a bunch of people who read it last year loved it. I actually read this for an episode of Shelve It or Scrap It I did, where I read other booktubers' favorite books, and this was the one that came up the most frequently. Now I had high hopes because of that, but then I also was a little bit nervous because this contains a murder mystery, but the world building was so atmospheric and immersive in this, and I loved the way that the plot unfolded. So this one is set in a world that is ruled by an emperor, and this emperor is coming to the end of his reign, and when that happens there is a competition held to replace him. The seven contenders in this competition are all raised by different monasteries across the world, each of them representing an animal that is one of the gods of this world. So we are following the competition to find the next emperor as it is unfolding, but we do also have an extra spanner in the works there because somebody has killed the Raven contender, and our main character, who is also from the Raven monastery, has been tasked with investigating as the competition, the trials continues. The amazing thing about this to me is that Antonia Hodgson is actually a crime writer. This is her first foray into fantasy because the way that the world is built in here, it's so rich and interesting and complex. I think the thing that shows Antonia Hodgson as being a crime writer though is the way that the plot twists are delivered. I think that Antonia Hodgson does a really good job of misdirecting your attention throughout the course of this so that you can't actually really see what is going on in the background until it is revealed. I think that her choices of perspective really lean into that as well. It also had like this cinematic element to it in the way that the perspectives were changed that I really loved. Overall, the impression that I got of this is that it was just really well thought out and masterfully executed, and I achieved a level of immersion within this story that is integral to me when it comes to my favorite fantasy books. Question number 2 is, what is the best sequel that you've read so far in 2026? And that is where my actual best book of the year enters the chat, which is Rights of the Starling by Daphne Perry. Now, something that The Raven Scholar and Rights of the Starling have in common is excellent plot twists. This one is the sequel to Shield of Sparrows. It is a romantasy series. The setup of it is very in line with a bunch of other romantasy stories. We're following a princess who is betrothed to the prince of a different kingdom as per the terms of an ancient treaty that keeps all of the human kingdoms allied together to protect them so they can band together and work together to fight off this migration of giant eagle-like monsters that decimate their entire land every generation. And our main character is not actually supposed to be the one that fulfills this treaty, but because of a certain set of circumstances, she is the one that is chosen, and she is completely unprepared for this. So that setup I've read before. But the more you read the first book in the series, the more it sets itself apart and stands on its own. It's set in this world that is plagued by monsters. They have regular animals as well, but then they have these monsters that are a little bit different. And on top of that, the monsters are behaving more erratically than usual, which is causing more attacks. And our main character has to team up with the love interest of this series, which is a legendary monster hunter, to get to the bottom of what is wrong with these monsters. But I think that Devney Perry kind of lulls you into a false sense of security in this series by presenting you a world that you think you know. Like I said, that setup very familiar to me. So I go into this with low expectations, not trying to peek behind the curtain. And the further you move through this series, the more and more layers you find this story has, as Devney Perry is just peeling back curtain after curtain, revealing an extra layer to this plot and this world every time that she does so. I thought that Shield of Sparrows was going to be really hard to beat, but Rights of the Starling does it. I think that Devney Perry also does a really good job of making me question myself. The big plot twist that happens in this one, I had a feeling about quite early on in the book, but there are so many things that happen in here that made me question myself and think that I was wrong. So by the time we were leading more concretely into this revelation, I was still very, very surprised. And I loved that Devney Perry once again fleshed out a very common trope, subverted it, turned it on its head, and exceeded all of my expectations for this one. I am so excited for the third book in this series, which will be released next March. And I also want to read some of Devney Perry's suspense now, because as you'll see later in this video, romantic suspense is something I'm now very, very interested in. And given the way the plot twists play out in this one, I feel like romantic suspense is going to be an excellent genre for Devney Perry. Question number 3 is, what is a new release that you haven't read yet but want to? I have so many of these. My mantra, I mean, everyone's mantra has always been so many books, so little time, right? That's something that we can all relate to. But this year, I feel like I'm really embodying that. There is so much that I have to read. There's so much that I want to read. I both want to take my time to absorb every single book on my TBR, but I simultaneously want to read every book that's ever been written all at once, like at the same time, and have all of that information just in my brain. But a very recent release that is at the top of my TBR right now is the Unicorn Hunters by Catherine Arden, which is one of my anticipated releases of the year. The reason why I'm so excited about this is because the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden is not only one of my favorite series, but it is also the series that made me realize that not only do I not dislike historical fiction, I actually really enjoy historical fantasy. There is a specific time period that I like. We've talked about it before on my channel. It is when kind of like Christianity and folklore are intersecting, but I also like anything kind of medieval and anything that kind of balances the real events of history with the folklore of the time period. And this one in particular is following Anne of Brittany, who promised her father on his deathbed that Brittany would never be conquered. However, she is being forced to marry the King of France. And so she does the only thing that she can think of, and she betroths herself to France's greatest enemy. However, to fulfill this betrothal, she has to get out of the sight of France's spies. And so she forms a hunting party and says that they are going to go and hunt unicorns, which is a big fat lie. But lo and behold, when they enter the forest, a unicorn does indeed appear. I think this is going to be lush and atmospheric and beautiful, and I'm so excited to sink into it. I feel like I've read a lot of romantasy this year, which there's nothing wrong with that, and I do enjoy it, and I will still continue to read it. But I feel like over the last month or so, I've had a real real craving for really like slow, atmospheric, kind of lush, beautiful stories. I guess more in line with like the Raven Scholar actually, and I definitely think that the Unicorn Hunters is going to deliver on that. Question number 4 is, what is your most anticipated release for the second half of the year? And I mean, I don't just have one. At the end of June, I actually posted my full anticipated releases video for the second half of the year, which contains 22 books. That's 11 more books than I had to talk about at this time in 2025. I am so excited for the releases in the second half of this year. There are so many great sequels coming out, so many new books by authors that I've read from and loved before, but there are also 2 new installments in 2 of my favorite series of all time being released. So those are the ones that we're going to talk about for this video. The first one, of course, is ACOTAR 6. Still no title, still no cover, by Miss Mass. I have always, if you have been here since 2017 or any time close, you will know I'm big of a Sarah J. Maas stan. I have been historically, and my feelings have changed a little bit with her more recent releases. I am both very excited and very, very scared for this book. I am, of course, going to be reading it immediately, but her last 3 releases, I think, have been the weakest that she has ever published. I really, really hope that that was kind of just a blip in her career and we can return to the strengths of like Throne of Glass and the early ACOTAR books. I'm also really excited to see where the focus of this one is, as somebody who's been like deep in mass lore and like the theories for the last 11 years at this point. That's when I first read A Court of Thorns and Roses, which is wild. And then the second book is Victorious by V. Schwab, which is the 3rd book in the Villains trilogy. Is this the finale? Will the series ever end? Who knows? Maybe we'll find out in Victorious. But this one is the 3rd book in the Villain series, and it is following Victor and Eli, who in college were best friends, and they wanted to find out how to create extraordinary. So these are people with essentially superpowers, and they discovered that the way to do that was to have a near-death experience. So they proceed to kill themselves and each other and resuscitate each other to gain these powers. And the main body of this story actually takes place 10 years after they were in college, where Victor has just been released from prison and he has a score to settle with his ex-best friend Eli. Question number 5 is, what is your biggest disappointment of the year? And I've had a handful, but you know, I move on from disappointing books quite quickly unless they're from like my favorite authors, and then it feels like a personal attack. So we've had none of those this year, which is great so far. But the one that I'm going to talk about is the most recent one because it's the most fresh, so I guess I'm still the most angsty about it, although not really actually, and that one was Daggermouth by H.M. Wolf. So this one is an incredibly hyped dystopian romance, and I picked it up, I added it on Kindle Unlimited when it had this burst of hype at the beginning of the year, and then it got traditionally published by Tor, and I had it on KU. So just before its release, I decided to give it a try, and I do still maintain that the end of this book, 5 stars. The last 2 chapters, 5 stars. The rest of it was more like a 2. But if you are unfamiliar with this one, it is set in this city that is segregated into rings. So in the middle you have the heart, which is where the elite live. Then you have the cardinal, which is where the very skilled workers work. So like the middle class, things like doctors, teachers, lawyers, that kind of thing. And then in the outer ring you have everybody else, but mainly the very poor people in society. You also have like the smugglers and the assassins. And one of our main characters, Shadira, is one of these assassins that are called Daggermouths. And she is given a contract to assassinate the son of the president, and she goes willingly and gleefully to do this. She's incredibly skilled, and she also has her own personal score to settle because the people of the heart are responsible for the death of her parents. So when she goes to assassinate this guy, he kind of submits. He like welcomes it. He's like, yeah, go ahead and kill me. And he reveals his face, which is taboo in this society. family, and all of the security personnel kind of sweep in and decide that because she has seen his face that they have to be married, and they're going to frame it as like this benevolent act of like allowing their son to marry into somebody who lives on the outer ring and kind of like heal the rebellion that's brewing between the rings. I feel like the first half of this book especially is more of like a mafia romance or a crime family romance than anything else. The difference between our society and this dystopian society that this book is set in is not all that different, and I don't think that this has any kind of really deep, profound message to say about society, which is typically what I do expect from dystopia. It just kind of goes for a very basic angle of like capitalism is bad, segregation and oppression is bad, and doesn't really get any more intricate than that. I also felt that the two main characters fell very, very flat in comparison to the side characters around them. I still maintain that Lyra is the star of the show in this book, and I really just wish that this series was about her and her love interest as opposed to the main characters, which felt like very two-dimensional cookie cutter characters that we've seen 100 times before. The ending though, I will say, was phenomenal. Question number 6 is, what is your most surprising read of the year so far? And I've had a few of these as well, but one of those was The Bone Raiders by Jackson Ford. So earlier in the year, I did a one-off vlog that was reviewing all of the books that had been in Fairy Lou's Epic Fantasy subscription for the first year of the subscription. And of those 4 books, the one that I actually expected to like the least was The Bone Raiders by Jackson Ford. And that is because I had heard that this was humorous. And you guys know humor in fantasy does not work for me. I like my fantasy to be taken very, very seriously. And this is humorous, but I feel like it strikes a really good balance of humorous dialogue and banter between characters and more serious moments within the plot, where I actually feel like the levity of the humor deepens the impact of the more serious topics that we're tackling in here. But this one is set in this vast plain called the Tapestry, and there is a Khan who has built a city to protect his people from the more powerful forces surrounding his country, and he is folding all of the communities of the Tapestry into this city. And our main characters that we're following actually form a raiding party called the Ricarda, whose lives have been destabilized by the Khan's city. And so when times are getting tough, they don't have any communities to raid anymore. There's big predators coming out of the mountains because the Khan is disrupting their hunting grounds. So the Ricarda decide to harness the power of one of these predators, which are the fire-breathing lizards, and learn how to ride them so that they can take a stand against the Khan. Question number 7 is, who is a new favorite author? And this can be an author who was a debut or is new to me. Now, I don't class an author as a favorite author until I've read more than one book from them, or if it's like a series and I've read one whole series, I would have to read something else like in a different world or a different series written by them for them to be one of my favorite authors. And I don't have any of those that I haven't read before that I've just discovered this year. But an author that I read from that I enjoyed so much that I'm so excited to read more from her is Catherine Cowell. So the book that I read was Across the Vanishing Sky, which is the first book in the Starlight Grove series. This is a romantic suspense series. It was my first foray into romantic suspense, which I did have a feeling I would enjoy it, because when I read contemporary romance, I do like it to be balanced with something else, whether that is some harder hitting topics or like some contemporary issues, or in this case, a little bit of a mystery plot line. And this one blew me away. I actually think that the suspense element was a lot better than I expected it to be, going into this knowing that it was predominantly a romance. This one in particular is following a woman who moves from a city in California to this small town where she'd been hiking a year before with her best friend, and her best friend had gone missing on this hike. The police don't want anything to do with this case, and so she has decided to move to this town to hunt for information herself. And as soon as she arrives in town, she meets a man man called Dex who used to work for the FBI as a hacker, but he has since left his job and he's moved back home to be closer to his brothers. And himself and his brothers actually have a little side project that they work on where they help to track down missing people where the case has gone cold. And the reason why they do this is because their father was a serial killer, and so they feel like they have a lot to atone for, even though their father's like actions are actually nothing to do with them. I gave this one 4 stars. It wasn't a perfect book or anything, but I ate this up. I was invested in the romance. The mystery played out better than I expected it to be, and I'm really excited to read the next 2 installments in this series, which are both released this year, one this month and one in October. The one that's released this month actually follows one of the brothers that I'm the most interested in, so that's great. But I also keep going to the works and eyeing up Catherine Cowell's Sparrow Falls series, which seems kind of in the same vein as this. They are kind of connected in that I'm pretty sure that a couple of the characters from Sparrow Falls are referenced in this first book, and it's nothing spoilery, but it just kind of gives you an inkling that you will see little cameos and pop-ups from other Catherine Cowell's characters if you read more from her, and that's definitely something that I would like to pursue. I'm not going to put this book down next because question number 8 is, who is your newest fictional crush? And I gotta say it's Dex Archer. There is something about a man who has a little bit of baggage, is a little bit broody, but underneath it all is like just deeply caring that I really enjoy, and Dex Archer is one of those guys. Question number 9 is, who is your newest favorite character? And I struggle with this question every year. I've spoken about this before as being one of the reasons why I don't typically love the main characters in like chosen one adult epic fantasy like Rand from Wheel of Time. The main character in The Bound and the Broken are 2 that I can think of off the top of my head, and I feel like they pale in comparison to the side characters because they are the dominant characters that serve as the vehicle through which you view the story. And this is very common in like romantasy and very popular fantasy as well. So especially when it comes to main characters, I always find it really difficult to pinpoint one that I really love. But a character I fell in love with this year is Brenda from Femme Fatale. So this was an arc that was sent to me by Bloomsbury, so thank you so much to Bloomsbury for that. And it is a satirical horror that compares perimenopause to transitioning into a werewolf. So we have our main character in here who is having a terrible time. Like, her husband's really complacent. She has just missed a promotion at work because a guy's just been hired into the company and promoted above her. And on top of that, she is going through perimenopause. But what she doesn't know to start off with is that she is also turning into a werewolf. But then we also have Brenda, and Brenda is an old lady who is very crotchety. She will tell you exactly what she thinks. She's a little confrontational, and her family want nothing to do with her. At her age, she's now lost everyone that she's ever cared about in terms of things like friends. I'm pretty sure she says in this that she doesn't feel like she's ever actually had a friend, and she's also had an incredibly difficult life. And I felt for Brenda so much throughout this. I did think that she was incredibly funny as well, and I just loved that she did not hesitate to speak her mind and also speak out when things that she perceived as wrong were happening and nobody seemed to care about it. Like, that sense of injustice I felt like really resonated with me, and I appreciated a character that went out and fought for it. But then also, like, her character just made me so deeply sad, and I adored her, honestly. And the reason why she gets involved in this storyline is because the werewolf is killing people's pets during her like monthly nighttime rampages, and Brenda's cat is killed by the werewolf, but the police don't really seem to want to do anything about it, so she takes it upon herself to lead an investigation, even though everybody tells her that she's silly and ridiculous and doesn't know what she's talking about. Question number 10 is, what is a book that made you cry? And you know, I've read a lot of John Gwynne this year, and that man always makes me shed a tear, but a book that resonated with me a lot emotionally is Human Rights by Juno Dawson. This one is the final book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series, which is a adult fantasy set in the north of England, following a group of women who used to be part of the same coven. Like, when they were kids, they formed a coven together. They're all witches, and this is many, many years after that. They've gone through a whole war between the witches and the warlocks since then, and they're now in their early to mid 30s, and one of them thinks that she has found the key to a prophecy that says that the sullied child is going to summon a demon that will bring about the end of days. And she thinks that she's found the sullied child, and so she asks her friend to rehabilitate this child. The reason why I cried in this is because there are just so many bittersweet moments in this series. I think that this is one of the most realistic portrayals of characters that I've ever seen, but specifically women. And I feel like the northern soul of this book really comes forward, like the resilience of, I guess, not just like people in the north of England, but also like British people in general. These women have a level of resilience that was just like so beautiful to me. The way that their characters are so layered in a way where all of the bad things that have ever happened to them, they carry with them. And we see this throughout this entire series. The stuff that's happened before the series, but everything that happens during it. But the way in spite of that, they can still allow joy into their lives, and they can allow themselves to experience joy, knowing that things will never be the same. Like the things that have happened will never not have happened, and these scars of those events will be carried forward. And it's the pursuit of joy in spite of that, or I guess bearing all of that, that really resonated with me in this book. And I shed a tear with just how kind of hopeful the ending was, in spite of all of the negative stuff that had happened before. Question 11 is, what is a book that has made you happy? And I'll be honest, I went through the list of all the books I've read so far this year, and there's not a lot of joy there. I feel like I've read a lot of serious books, but a unserious book that I read, or I guess not like a deep dark fantasy that I've read this year that I loved, was in fact a reread. It was my reread of The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. Not only was I happy because I was rereading my favorite contemporary romance of all time, but also because I annotated this. This was the first book that I ever annotated, and I had such a good time with this that I am rereading and annotating ACOTAR as we speak. I love the way that annotating almost gets me more involved with the text. I've always known that I'm somebody who learns through things like writing, like copying down and like physically engaging with material in that way. I also learn really well through reading, but I think when my mind switches into annotation mode, I think a lot more about what I'm reading as I'm reading it, because I'm also trying to engage with it, and that led me to have a deeper enjoyment of this book. I mean, aesthetically, I also just love how annotated books love, and I also really enjoyed the personal element of it. So I had a really good time with this because I love this book and I still loved it on reread, but I also loved it because the annotation experience brought me so much joy. Question number 12 is, what is the most beautiful book that you bought this year? And as you know, we have no shortage of beautiful books in this household, but I picked one that is not only just very nice to look at, but I also love because it is a nice edition of one of my favorite series that we've already talked about in this video, and that is the Illumicrate editions of Vicious and Vengeful by V. Schwab. I so hope that they do Victorious to match, otherwise I'm gonna be mad. Something that Illumicrate do occasionally that I really enjoy is these clear plastic dust jackets over a printed hardcover. We all know that I love a printed hardcover anyway, especially when it's a landscape design. These ones remind me a lot of the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend and how their naked hardcovers look, but then also the way that you have the jacket image overlaid over the hardcover, I am obsessed with. And then you also, on these ones, have the edges that line up as well. The second book is even more beautiful. I feel like we have a little bit more detail, as well as the third character on there, and overall gorgeous. I probably have, in fact, I know that I have books that aesthetically I probably like to look at more than these, but these ones are beautiful books that I know that I'm going to keep, if not forever, then for a really long time, because I love this series. Question number 13 is one that I often skip because I don't always have an answer for it, but that is, what is the best book adaptation you've seen this year? And I think, along with the rest of the world, I have to say Off Campus. You know, this wasn't the best thing that I've ever seen, and I did have a think it might actually be the only book adaptation I've seen this year. I did thoroughly enjoy it though. So this is the Prime Video TV adaptation of The Deal by Elle Kennedy, which is a book that I read last year and actually really enjoyed, given that I'm not typically a fan of sport at all. So sport romance was not one that I was like desperate to get into. And also considering it was published like 10 years ago, I really thought that there would be issues with it that I just didn't really have. But the TV show I do think is a little bit cheesy, a little bit cringy, and it feels like a Disney Channel movie. Like some of these scenes were very like Camp Rock, High School Musical. Some of the way that it was shot, the delivery was giving Disney Channel to me. It also paid homage to a bunch of like 2000s rom-coms, which obviously I loved, given that that was the era of the rom-com, and I don't think that this show quite hit the level of that rom-com, but it was really sweet. It was really addictive to watch. So I definitely enjoyed it while I was watching it, and I ate it up. I like that they introduced the couple from the next season and kind of built their storyline into season 1, and also to give a little bit more substance to the plot line alongside just like one relationship. I'll definitely be watching season 2. So not a perfect watch, but job's a good one. And our final question number 14, is what books do you have to read by the end of the year? And my answer, as always, is all of them. I have a fair few books that I have been rolling over from TBR after TBR throughout this entire year that I would really like to catch up on. I'm also trying to keep up with my book club stuff. We will be eventually, before the end of this year, going into a new era of catch up book club. We're currently in the process of deciding what series that we're going to be reading, but the announcement should be coming next month, I think, if all goes to plan. I'm also participating in Sandra's Cosmere read along, which I will link down below if you guys haven't checked it out. We're going to be reading the entire Cosmere, as the majority of it is a reread for me. I'm just going to be kind of dipping in and out of it and rereading the ones that I want to, which means that I won't be around for Mistborn Era 2 essentially, but that means that I'll definitely be reading Elantris and also rereading at least some of Mistborn Era 1 this year. I'm also making recap videos for the entire A Court of Thorns and Roses series leading up to ACOTAR 6's release, and then of course ACOTAR 7 at the beginning of 2027. So I need to reread all of those. I'm annotating all of those, and I'll be making the recap videos. And then I also want to do a project on the Broken Binding sci-fi and fantasy subscription, as I have done for the Fairy Loot Romancy subscription and also their Epic subscription. So I have all of those. And then I also have, you know, just books that I generally just want to read. So there's a lot going on. I don't know how much I'm going to get to. Like I said, I want to really take my time and get absorbed in some stuff. I've really been craving an old long series recently. Series that come to mind that I feel would satisfy this craving, although I have no proof of that, is the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I read the first book in the Rhaenyra Chronicles by Michael J. Sullivan, the first book that he published, and wouldn't mind blasting through all of those. So that's kind of what my mood is drawing me to right now, but I'll just do my best. As always, I'm full of video ideas, and I wish I could split myself into like 5 different people that could read for 5 different reasons, because I am constantly torn between wanting to really like immerse myself in something and read really slowly, and also just consume everything all at the same time, and I just flip-flop between them on a daily basis. But that was our final question, so that is a wrap for the mid-year book freakout tag for 2026. I always ask you a question to round out the video, so this year I think we will go with, because I am in a big reading mood right now and I do want to read everything all of the time, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you guys would like to let me know that you were here but you don't feel like you have anything to say, leave me a hockey stick. Is that a thing? It is. Leave me a hockey emoji for off campus. But aside from that, guys, thank you so much once again for being here and supporting my channel, whether you've been here for the last 9 years or whether you are fresh and new. I appreciate every single one of you guys. And as usual, please please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Patreon if you want to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.